I'm Paul Anders Schwam, Director of Globalis Media and the host of the Interactive Japan program on ITV Japan. Thank you for joining us. With us today, I'm pleased to present Neeraj Jhanji, who is the founder and CEO of ImaHima Corporation. Neeraj, nice to have you with us today.
Thanks, Paul.
You and I started our first ventures in 1999, went through that rough period, 1999-2000, when a lot of ventures and exciting things were happening here in Japan. My staff and myself at the time were so impressed by the first of many businesses you have formed here in Japan, which was the eponymously named ImaHima service. And for some of our audience who may not know, Ima means now and Hima means free time. So basically your first service means something like, do you have free time, or can we meet? Can you start, and again, realizing that you've launched many different businesses, but that one so intrigued me over the years, can you start by first telling us about the original service you launched?
Well, ImaHima was and is the name of the company that I run, but the whole idea came to me in early 1999, when mobile internet was just beginning to take off, and it was very common to see people with iMode phones walking around Shibuya. And I was wondering for a long time what it could be that would be so relevant to mobile internet. And the idea came to me one day walking around in my neighborhood in Daikanyama on a weekend. It was a Saturday, and I went out for lunch, and I was walking towards a nearby train station, which is the Ebis train station, and I saw this amazing rush of people from the train station. And I was alone. I just had my watch, my wallet, and my phone. And subconsciously, I felt like if any of my friends were nearby, seeing all those people, and then I reached out in my pocket, took this phone out, and looked at it, and I was like, here's my friend list, and the cellular knows where each phone is, so it knows where my friends are. Why doesn't it tell me? And so that was just an idea that registered, from the subconscious to my conscious, and I kept it. And I talked about it with friends, and it seemed like they all thought it was great, but nobody was doing it. So I thought I might as well try and prove the idea. And so we ended up building a site in late 1999 called ImaHima, where people were announcing their location from their mobile phones for their friends, and it caught on. And we had hundreds of thousands of users very quickly. So that kind of forced us to get into a corporate form and pursue it in kind of a more professional way.
And so basically when it's got to be hundreds of thousands of users, somebody could say, I'm in Shinjuku and I'm up for shopping. Anybody I know or anybody I can meet around here who's up for that. Or I'm in Shibuya and I'm up for going to yakitori.
Sure.
This kind of thing?
Absolutely. Not only that, there are many times when you have something specific to say to some of your friends, but many times you're feeling lonely in a big city and you crave for communication but do not know who to disturb. So you might as well go to your ImaHima thing and say, oh, my pet fell off the stairs, or hey, I saw this today. And then people can respond if they catch on to that trigger. So it's basically another form of communicating which is within your friends and brings you closer together through your phone all the time.
With the benefit of hindsight, and this being now mid-2007, you're talking about 1999, people watching this may say, oh, well, that's not such a big deal now. He's using this and this and this technology. Back then, it was a big deal. There was not the ubiquitous GPS-enabled handsets that there are now. So you actually had to deal with the user location issue using, older technology. There was all kinds of issues as far as really iMode, getting on their menu of third-party services, payment systems, their concerns about allowing people to connect with people that they don't know. So we'll call that security concerns. So a lot of things that were today in 2007 may seem to be not such a big deal. It was pretty pioneering in a lot of ways back then. Can you delve into a few of those areas and the challenges you faced?
Well, you hit upon them very succinctly, but I guess one of the key issues is how do you capture the location information? But on the kind of the other side of the coin, you got to think about how do you not invade the privacy, while doing that. And I was looking for a fun little consumer app, So rather than depend on technology, we just did what was the simplest, which is allowed the people to announce at their will where they are, but just made it very, very easy. So people who are using browser phones like iMode, we created a select list that people can go to the site and from the select list choose if they're at home, if they're in a hotel, or if they're at work, or in a specific location which was added to their favorite list, and just click update. For people who weren't using that, for example, when we launched ImaHima over SMS phones in Europe, they would just send an SMS message to our server. We would parse the message. So they could say update and I'm cycling by Lake Zurich, and we would basically pick the location information that way. So one of the things about ImaHima which allowed people's privacy concerns to be somewhat addressed was that we didn't actually track you all the time. You could say where you are going to be, which is not possible with GPS phones. You could lie if you wanted to, and all that, and therefore it was good enough for that purpose. Regarding the business model, I think that was, of course, a more difficult aspect to figure out, because initially my idea was that it was a new piece of information now that we knew about consumers, where they are in real time, and not only them, but where their friends are. And so if you could somehow, as a marketer, get access to this sort of information and be able to drive real-time traffic to stores, wouldn't that be great? But what we found was most advertising agencies and web agencies were just not geared up at that point for this type of business. And so our thoughts were, do we actually end up setting up a huge sales force and collect all this data about stores and promotions in real time across Japan, and it was just too big of a task. So we took the alternative path and tried to think about billing the end user as a premium service, as a content service. And then, as you pointed out, I mean, carriers have this, garden wall approach about listings, and ours being a community site seemed to not be very well set with their agendas. So we had to work through alternative solutions to solving payment collections. And so I've been working on that for a long time, and I think finally there are some solutions, but back then we had to really agree to many of the editorial suggestions made by the carriers if you wanted to be on the menu. It was quite frustrating.
You mentioned the word community 2 or 3 times in that explanation, and one of the other many things that has always fascinated me about you launching ImaHima in 1999 is that, to me, it was basically one of the first SNS systems that I'm aware of in the world. I mean, MySpace was launched in 2003. Mixi, which is kind of the MySpace of Japan, if you will, the biggie here, was launched in 2004 maybe. You guys launched an SNS service in 1999. That's impressive. But you mentioned, again, I mean, we mentioned, it's great to be early on these things, but sometimes it's a dual-edged sword. It's the old joke about leading edge or bleeding edge. It must have been challenging in many ways, in some ways fascinating, in some ways for you and your team challenging that you came up with all these things, but that, first to do this, first to do this, first to do this. But are the advertisers, are the business partners, are the consumers, and are the gatekeepers like iMode, and Docomo, NTT, are they ready for all these firsts?
Yeah, well, I mean, you said it all, but basically, I think there were a lot of lessons for us to learn, being the first, and not only from what we did right or wrong, but also later looking on at other companies like Mixi and MySpace who did it differently. I wouldn't think of our attempt as a failure. ImaHima is still in business, and it rolled its experience from ImaHima into follow-on services that we launched. So later on, some of the tools we had built for ImaHima were useful for building mobile content sites for Harry Potter and AOL Messenger. Some of the communities that had gathered hundreds of thousands of users, we were able to transplant them into other communities we built later, like Habbo Hotel for the online world. And the payment systems, we actually later on rolled off into another product called PayMe. And so that experience catapulted itself in many different ways. And is available in many different forms for consumer usage today. And ImaHima became an example, a role model, a harbinger of things to come. So companies around the world caught on to the idea of location-based communities, and it became almost like a must-have in carrier menus globally. Friend Finder and all that. So in Switzerland and in US and in China and Taiwan, such services sprouted up. And so in the end, I would say that was good for the industry and good for consumers, and good for us too, because we learned a lot and then realized where and how we should do things differently.
And in fact, ImaHima was launched in a few other countries besides Japan, right? What, Switzerland, Australia?
Yes, we launched in Switzerland on the SMS kind of technology. It was a completely different interface because you were sending text messages to our server and then it would parse it and send it to your friends. In Australia, because it was an iMode partner, Telstra, our approach was similar to Japan. Although the penetration being very, very low, it made it a different sort of challenge. But those were really interesting attempts, you know, as a Japanese company founded by a foreigner and then launching it in foreign countries. And, you know, people, yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the, you know, you mentioned them all kind of in passing. Let's take a minute or so on each one. So in the evolution of your ImaHima, the company, from the original ImaHima site, basically that evolved into, if you will, a mobile platform. You had instant messaging capability, and I believe one of your next projects was AOL Instant Messenger in Japan.
Right. Yeah, we were experimenting with Java phones that had just come out. I think we were talking about early 2002, if I'm not wrong. And Docomo had just announced that you could download Java applets to your phone. And we had been waiting for something like that because we were interested in adding a feature of kind of real-time communication between our community, which was only possible with some sort of dynamic local client like Java can enable. And so when the phones came out, within a month, we had a prototype running that we were polishing for our community. Little did we know that in the world, at the same time, there was a company that was created a little while ago called Docomo AOL, and the whole genesis of this company was based on the principle of fixed mobile convergence. So the idea of AOL bringing its instant messenger to the mobile phone was a necessity for this company to execute on. And since we had built this so early, you know, that discussion happened and we ended up licensing some of our technology, which was rebranded as AOL Instant Messenger for iMode. And that was quite interesting. And we retained kind of the technology which could be used for other deployments for ourselves or other ISPs or carriers, and we explored that market a little bit.
Okay, and then just retaining that thought for a moment, you also pretty much around the same time, and again based on your experiences with your original service, ImaHima, you got into a content management system, or you developed a content management system. Can you talk to us a little bit about the genesis for that and the merits of that?
Yeah, thanks for reminding that. I mean, CMS, content management system, is typically a common word now when people are maintaining websites. And it's similar like when you're maintaining a blog, in effect, it's a content management system. You're publishing very easily without having to worry about uploading different files to production servers and all that. So in mobile world, it's a mobile content management system is actually even more critical because, especially in Japan, you've got these subscription sites where people are paying monthly to continue their membership. So they need to get value for that money on a daily basis, which means as a content provider, you need to update and refresh your site, you know, sometimes even several times a day. And so when you operate that business with, you know, several different sites, you really need these automated tools to push your content. But it's actually not as easy for mobiles because, you know, the handset formats, you know, are very different, especially in Japan. There's hundreds of different handsets now, different screen sizes, color resolutions, and required formats for video and ringtones are all handset to handset, and they're changing as new devices come to the market. So for a content provider to worry about all that and create content in all those different formats is impractical. So what this mobile content management system really does is, when the request comes in from a user, it really tries to understand, you know, which handset it is, and based on its database of handset properties, you know, which we are continually refreshing, it goes and fetches the right format content for that handset. That's one of the things. In other things, it can link to the carrier's billing systems, and it can, you know, do a lot of reporting that's needed for jazz track, for ringtone usage, and basically makes the task of a content provider to manage these sites much more scalable and easy and non-technical. Okay,
so we've talked about your ability to develop communities, instant messaging capability, chatting, instant messaging capabilities, and the content management systems, which again is quite a challenge in Japan, given the plethora of makers, models of handsets, some 3G, some not, some video enabled, some not. So putting these things together, and I know there's some other platforms you've developed I want to get to in a few minutes, but putting those together, let's talk about some of the consumer sites you've been involved with. One was Habbo Hotel, which probably a lot of our viewers know is a hugely successful worldwide phenomenon of basically characters or avatars that young people, I guess mainly teenagers, can go into a site and buy a character or get a free character, but buy furniture or pets,
exactly.
etc.
Yeah.
And your team basically developed the site in conjunction with the owner of the character, I guess a Finnish company called
Sulake Corporation.
Sulake. So they got in touch with you.
Right.
You've developed their Japanese site.
Right.
I believe it was hugely successful. And again, you used those platforms that you had developed to, as part of the successful launch for the Habbo Hotel Japanese version.
Yeah, it's quite true that I guess one thing we did always connected to other in a very natural way. And just as we talked about instant messaging for ImaHima ultimately became kind of the foundation for AOL Messenger. Likewise, we were chosen by Ars Electronica, which is kind of this media arts festival for Europe, you know, where they celebrate attempts in mobile and new media space. And we were winning an award at that point in the net vision category, and we ran into these guys from Sulake, these Finnish kids, you know, they were playing around with Flash in unique ways. They were making programmable Flash communities. And it was quite fascinating. And given that ImaHima was pushing the envelope in some ways, we ran into these types of, you know, leading edge kind of services from other parts of the world in many different places. So after, you know, kind of some chance meeting in Finland when I was there on a weekend, we realized that it would be really sensible to bring it to Japan, and we proposed that. And we saw that the soul of the Habbo Hotel concept around communities was very similar to ImaHima. Other than in ImaHima, you kind of said where you are. In Habbo, a virtual character is really standing in front of you, whereas in a different room, which is also a presence metaphor. So we got pretty excited about that, and they also liked the fact that we could use some of our instant messaging technology to build a mobile version of Habbo Hotel for Japan, starting with Japan, which was leading and continues to lead in terms of the network and handset maturity. So yes, we started with that, and we started with the business planning, the strategy, all aspects of mobile and merchandising and billing systems and partnerships and teams and support. And so we built it from nothing to about 750,000 users over 2.5 years, and it was generating good revenue. In fact, the ARPU, average revenue per user in Japan, was twice of any other Habbo country.
Wow.
And we had very interesting difference that the typical target was 12 to 16-year-olds around the world, but in Japan we had a second hump in our user demographic, which was the early 20s, and they were totally into it and spending a lot of money. One funny anecdote there is that because there were these two different demographics, we had to come up with other creative ways to make sure that the richer, older Habbo users were not kind of looking like these elder brothers or these poorer.
Right.
So we came up with two different pools where a deeper swimming pool was for the older, and not only that, we organized a lot of tournaments for the young kids who had more time than money to win some of these prizes and furniture and kind of live in a more equitable online society. So that was kind of fun.
It's interesting how actually around the world you do get different demographics, different age groups using avatar and character sites, because in Korea, a lot of office ladies in Korea in their 20s are avid avatar users. They accessorize and personalize and will spend tens, in some cases hundreds of dollars a month on their avatars. And then even in America, and I think a lot of countries around the world, you get the massive, the massive online user. I always forget the acronym for it, but the users
massive multiplayer online game.
Thank you very much. It's a mouthful, but a lot of people our age, our respective ages, play those things and take them very seriously. So it's interesting. I mean, it's too easy and superficial to say, oh, something with characters and avatars must only appeal to teens. That's not the case around the world. It's got pretty widespread in interest among, across demographics.
That's right. And I think one thing that's worth saying is that, I mean, some of these games can be violent and maybe appeal to a certain category demographic. But what I really liked about Habbo was it was very non-violent and social, and it was really focused on building creativity at an age where adolescence is coming and you really need to kind of discover yourself through communicating with other people. So there were certain beliefs in Habbo, such as there was no smoking and we weren't selling these types of things that we thought were not really necessary in line with our value system. And we really focused on kind of tying up the media brands that also stood for the similar beliefs, like Lego and MTV Japan and organize some unique methods of consumer online user behavior that actually appealed to parents and teachers, and they would actually support a lot of things that were being done.
All good things. Now, in fact, Habbo was such a good thing. You got so many users that it got to the critical mass stage where the people in Finland said, you know what, we'd like to run this ourselves as a subsidiary in Japan, which is a real feather in your team's cap that you help somebody enter a market, develop their local site, and then it gets to the size where they say, you know, now this can afford us our own infrastructure in Japan. So I guess that's kind of bittersweet.
Yeah.
You got the success you set out to do, but to the point where your partner said, okay, we'll take it over from here.
Yeah, it's like being a surrogate mother.
Right.
You know? I mean, it's not your baby, so you can love it as much as you want, but ultimately the biological mother owns it. And so, you know, it was also a good experience for us to know how to build partnerships with companies where, you know, the differences in Japan and Japanese marketplace necessitate a slightly different approach. And you need to be able to have a certain level of independence versus this global McDonald's-style franchising, and then as well as kind of respect, you know, that this is not your stuff, so you cannot just completely change it.
And you know, also interestingly, they actually got investment from SoftBank in Japan and some other major investors. So I mean, again, a lot of that was on the back of the great work you had done in partnership with the Sulake people. So you have a lot to be proud of. Moving quickly, because I'm cognizant of our time, Harry Potter is, I think, the next consumer site you got involved with. Time Warner, or Warner Entertainment, one of those subsidiaries. And they asked you to develop their m-commerce site for Harry Potter in Japan?
It was actually a premium content site first, and then the m-commerce was an add-on component. But the idea is that Harry Potter is a global brand, and again, it's targeted at teenagers. And it was an attempt that, you know, as Warner puts all its marketing effort behind the Harry Potter movie, is there a way in which they can leverage that brand off other media formats such as merchandising and, of course, in this particular case, mobile content? So, you know, premium content such as ringtones or screensavers or behind-the-scenes information or fan clubs or some sort of direct contact to J.K. Rowling, et cetera, reserved for Harry Potter fans, and to provide it in the same way in which they're experiencing the Harry Potter world through the book and through the movie. Was kind of a strategic necessity, and because we had the CMS and all this experience in working with the carriers and the relationships, we were asked to kind of assist with that. And I think another aspect why we were chosen, although we were somewhat small, had to do with our flexibility. So unlike some of these bigger content providers, you know, they had to come up with troves full of content to match the number of hundreds of screensavers that are minimum requirements for carrier approval. But we are willing to walk kind of the fine line which satisfied both the overseas content owners and the local Japanese carriers. And I think, you
know, if I may, and again, here with the Harry Potter site, you use these various tools you had developed in your earlier businesses, and so people could go in and not only kind of interact and find out what's happening in the Harry Potter world, but interact with other Harry Potter fans, right?
Yes.
So, listen, again, in the interest of time, you developed these tools, you really understood what it takes to develop these kind of sites and services, and you sometimes, I believe, had your own frustrations in managing these projects, because let's face it, you're dealing with worldwide partners, demands, a team that's international. So you started using some tools, I believe, from another company that impressed you as great technology and more than technology, just overall project management tools. And you ended up being the Japan representative for that company and developing their Japanese versions. Am I correct?
Yes.
Could you tell us about those tools and what you're doing with that company?
Well, those tools were not necessarily in any way related to the tools we had developed ourselves, but they made our company much more efficient in doing other things which we didn't have tools for. For example, there's this tool called Jira, which is an issue tracker. It's a great tool if you have these tasks that you want to do with other people in your team, sometimes even remotely dispersed, and you just want to keep a good track of which task is where at what time, and who's holding the ball right now. So it's like this web coordinator, if you will, who maintains all these open issues in the pipeline of all the different projects that you're doing, and you can really sleep in peace, because if priorities change, you just update it there, and all your team is in sync at all the time.
And what makes it better than the plethora of project management tools that are out there?
Well, there's something very unique about this company, Atlassian. I guess it starts with kind of their philosophy, which impressed me first because they were coming from the open source background. And yet they had found the sweet spot between completely proprietary enterprise software, which runs into hundreds of thousands or even more dollars, and big ticket sales items, versus complete open source tools like Bugzilla or something where the interface is still leaving something to be desired and there's not enough support, and you really don't get so excited about it. And so they'd come in between because they'd borrowed on some of these open source components and then released some of these components back to the open source community for free usage, but then added this whole polish of functionality and design in a really world-class way, leading-edge way, that it made the tools very easy to use and fun to use. So that was one of the first things, and then added to that their pricing, because I guess they were younger and they had to take a different approach. They price these software at prices you can buy through your credit card online, a couple $100. Okay. And with that, the penetration they achieved, I mean, today it's about 7,000 customers globally. Wow. From Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies all the way down to 5-people teams who are managing their projects. So that penetration gave a massive amount of user feedback, which fed back into polishing their product to the next release, which comes incidentally every 2 months.
Wow.
And then, to a point that the product is matured, to a very advanced stage compared to any other competition, controls 70 to 80% market share.
Okay, and this is again Jira, J-I-R-A, from the company Atlassian. And then there's another product of theirs that you're also working on in the Japanese market.
Well, I'm sure you've heard of Wikipedia.
Of course.
So, I mean, after blogs, I mean, wikis are a great tool for consumers to start maintaining and editing a common information source together. Or
organizations,
right.
Not necessarily consumers.
Exactly. And so the difference from Wikipedia to Confluence, which is the second product, is it's taking the wiki concept but adding the functionality which a corporation needs to make it an enterprise wiki. Namely, in a company, yes, you want to share all types of information, but again, sometimes information has to be kept in silos. So you have to limit access to information by groups and departments and individuals. And so Confluence adds very fine level, granular access level permissions. And it is superbly scalable and supported by wide community. They give away the source code to commercial licensees during the term of the license, have great APIs, etc., a lot of plugins. It just makes it a no-nonsense choice for companies who are trying to find a practical solution for their knowledge management needs.
So may I ask you directly, between Confluence and Jira that you're both representing here in Japan, about how many corporate users or customers have you acquired so far for the two aggregately? Sure.
I mean, IT in Japan is on a slightly different trajectory than Northern American and Western Europe markets. But it's interesting that coming from this type of open source world and this type of pricing and business model, we localized and launched these products somewhere around mid last year, and already we have about 100 plus
100 clients
Japanese
within a year or less.
Yes, without any sincere marketing spend,
that's
through word of mouth. And so it's interesting. I mean, we made a big switch from consumer-oriented services to enterprise, and we are enjoying the journey.
And going forward, no one has a crystal ball, but what's your feeling of, say, the next year for ImaHima? Do you think you'll continue along this enterprise path, or if opportunities come up to do more consumer-oriented things, would you consider doing some more of those? Or
yes, I mean, I think we are all looking for the next big idea to give some meaning to our life.
If you find it, please tell me first.
But amongst the things we did, we came up through this billing gateway product called PayMe, which allows overseas merchants to have convenience store payment option for their consumers in Japan. And so we're launching that this year, and then keeping our ears and eyes open for the next big idea.
And surprisingly, there's too many payment systems in Japan, yet there's not really one good one for online. And surprisingly, maybe to our audiences, PayPal isn't really active in Japan. So you have now what's an alternative for people to pay online.
Yeah, I mean, this PayMe system, it also came out through our efforts to find a viable solution to basically allowing everyone to pay. And in that sense, we don't allow person-to-person payments, but for foreign merchants trying to collect money in Japan, it's a great come-through. So we're excited about it.
So PayMe.
Yes.
Okay. Neeraj, I'm sorry, we've got to stop it there. We ran out of time, but maybe you'll come back and give us an update sometime down the road.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you again for watching the Interactive Japan program on ITV Japan, and we hope to see you here next time. Thank you.